Good evening, everyone, and welcome to night 2 of the AP Gov Win broadcast. Okay, so remember the hashtag AP Gov Win. We are going to be taking questions tonight via Twitter, and of course, remember that followers get first priority. But send your questions to me and/or Paul Sargent at @PSargent on Twitter, and we will answer as many as we get time to answer. And so we want to make sure that that you're watching our broadcast, that you're getting your questions answered. Now, keep in mind that we are, going to have a difficult time getting to every question. Okay, so remember, we won't be able to answer everything, but we will do as much as we can. And remember, the people who've been supporting our work, when we see them, we're probably going to answer their questions first. People who are following, priority, all that kind of stuff. We'll have to prioritize. We're going to do what we can, and everybody is going to be helped, whether we know them or not, whether they're following us or not, or anything like that. Now, and speaking of being helped, remember that I have an app for AP Government, Romulus AP Government Review, just a $2.99 app. I'm going to be putting up promo codes during the session. Now, if you can afford it, if you've got an account, go ahead and buy it. I mean, it's just $2.99 on Google Play and the App Store. So, there are some people that don't actually have access, like they can't buy stuff on these things. So if you're one of those people that can buy it, and you want it, just try to save those promo codes for people who, really legitimately cannot buy the app for whatever reason. But at the same time, if it's out there, there's no screening, just whatever. But remember, there will be a limited number of promo codes that'll be put out while we're streaming tonight. So we are going to go to Twitter in just a minute. But before that, I'm going to introduce my friend Paul Sargent, who has a lot of AP government videos, and I'm very glad that Paul's joining me tonight. Paul.
Hey, I'm Paul Sargent. I've been teaching AP Government for about 10 years now. And, the exam is always a stressful time. It's always a tough time. And, there's a lot of information that we got to sort of pull together here. But we're going to try and do our best to answer your questions and try and clarify things a little bit and hopefully help those scores out a little bit tomorrow morning.
All right, and Paul, thank you so much for joining us. And let's see who is here and who's asking questions, where they want to direct us tonight. All right, so as far as that kind of stuff, what did Joey Martin? Bigger Jawa, tomorrow is Star Wars Day. All right, so let's see. Voting decisions in Congress. Okay, can you explain how public opinion limits and enhances influence on voting decisions in Congress? Now, certainly, if you think about, for example, President Trump has had, for the most part, low approval ratings since he's taken office. Well, what that does is that emboldens the opposition. All right, so they smell blood. Now, you think about what's going on right now with the attempted Obamacare repeal. Because of the president's low approval ratings, and of course, President Obama, ended up, leaving office with the highest his approval rating had ever been since 2009. So it's like President Trump's approval rating comparatively lower. And so basically the Republicans, even though they control both houses of Congress, they're a little bit squeamish. They're not necessarily, falling in line behind the president. Now, if President Trump had a 60% approval rating, then first of all, the Republicans would be more likely to fall in line behind the president, and the Democrats would be less likely to offer a lot of resistance. And so I think that when it comes to congressional voting decisions, I think that that's it. Now, another thing, though, it's going to happen is party discipline. It's amazing how a lot of times Americans just don't seem to like new legislation. When Obamacare passed, the majority of Americans opposed it. But when it came time for the vote, party discipline took over. So that's another thing. Like, to some extent, public opinion can govern congressional voting. But on the other hand, then, you can have things as far as, party discipline that'll affect it as well. Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, one thing I want to add is there's been a lot of FRQs lately about party polarization and sort of how party polarization is becoming bigger and bigger. And this is a concept that my students have struggled with a little bit. And if you see that term, party polarization, think about parties that are pulling kind of away from each other, kind of like the North and South Pole, of the Earth. And they're increasingly sort of consolidating their sides. And what this does is this means that the two parties are not only going to try and close ranks, like they're going to vote more along party lines, but they're also going to be more likely to really oppose party, well, I guess really oppose things that the other party is trying to do. Maybe not because they necessarily disagree, but because they're going to try and be oppositional. And so what you end up with this party polarization is you end up with either bills which are very one-sided. You know, and we have Republican majorities in Congress now, so you would tend to see Republican, like very Republican bills, or like another thing that you kind of see this just lack of compromise. You know, there's no middle ground that people are really seeking. They're just trying to either get their side or obstruct the other side.
All right. And so what we've got here, now we hit on this last night, but we can do that tonight. That's certainly a big topic. Let me see what's going on here. Okay. So Abby asks, can I explain enumerated and implied powers with examples? Paul, you want to go ahead and tackle that one?
Yeah, sure. So look, if you're a constitutional scholar, you probably are going to really want to know the difference between like enumerated, expressed, or delegated powers. But for the AP Gov exam, I think we could pretty much say that they're kind of the same thing. Expressed, enumerated powers, these are powers which are listed in the Constitution. They're given to the branches of government. An example would be that Congress has the ability to regulate interstate commerce. Implied powers are powers which are not stated directly in the Constitution, but which are logically an extension of the powers which are given to the Constitution. Now, what's logical is, of course, up for some discussion, but if Congress has the power of interstate commerce, then it's implied that in the 1950s they could establish the interstate highway system and build that, because that would help them establish more efficient interstate commerce. So, but of course, the founding fathers didn't write in the Constitution that Congress has the power to, you know, create an interstate highway system, because they wouldn't have thought of it. So, implied powers are things which are powers which are not really stated in the Constitution, and your enumerated powers are ones which are very specifically laid out.
All right. Okay. So, Paul, now another thing is, now we get into the strict and loose construction of the Constitution. And that's, you know, for those of you who have taken AP US history, think about like Jefferson and Hamilton. Okay. Whereas Jefferson, as a strict constructionist, didn't believe in the doctrine of implied powers, whereas Hamilton really kind of formulates this. You know, it's like basically the national bank, you know, that nowhere does it say that Congress has the authority to charter a national bank, but it does say, Hamilton says, that Congress can borrow money, coin money, tax, and the national bank would be helpful on these things. Now, of course, Jefferson said, as a strict constructionist, you know, not believing in the doctrine of implied powers, that, you know, the Constitution doesn't say convenient, it says necessary and proper. So remember, the necessary and proper clause, otherwise known as the elastic clause, is a very big deal here. And just to let y'all know, I just tweeted a couple of promo codes for Romulus Gov for iOS, for iPhones. I'll get a couple Android codes out as well tonight. We'll get a few more iOS codes. Remember, mainly for the people who really don't have another way to get a hold of the app. But the app's got like 300 questions. It's got a section on court cases, all kinds of other stuff. All right, an executive agreement versus an executive order. Now, an executive agreement is kind of a treaty light, okay? Like basically, it doesn't go through all of the approval process of a treaty. It treats like an agreement with a foreign power basically as legislation, whereas a treaty that has to go through, a treaty has to get 2/3 of the U.S. Senate to be ratified, but an executive agreement just has to get a majority of both houses. So it doesn't carry the same force as a treaty, but for all practical purposes, it's treated the same way, but it's passed through as legislation rather than going through the treaty process. So that's an executive agreement. Now, an executive order, this is where the president does business, like basically gives an order to the executive branch. It only applies to the executive branch and has to do with, this is how you will do your job. Okay. So for example, a few years ago, President Obama issued an executive order about illegal immigrants and basically allowing certain illegal immigrants to, basically we're not going to enforce for these 5 million people who've been here a while. President Trump with the travel ban, that was an executive order to all the executive departments. Now, of course, through checks and balances, that was struck down by a federal judge. So that is, an executive order has to do with the president acting as chief executive, giving an order to the executive branch. Now, that's not a law. That's only for the executive branch. And of course, it can be challenged in court. So that's an executive order versus an executive agreement, which is kind of a light version of a treaty. Oral arguments, Cody, that is when somebody goes before the Supreme Court and the attorneys make their oral arguments in front of the court. Now, as far as that goes, let's see. Let me find a good question for you, Paul. Now, Paul, would you like to talk about some of these organizations? I'm getting something about like the 501c and the 527s and that sort of thing, and maybe just kind of go into a general kind of campaign finance little primer, if you could.
All right. Well, campaign finance is always sort of a tricky subject because it tries to fight the influence of money inside of our democracy. Money can have a corruptive influence here. And so there was an attempt to try and rein in the flow of money to, maybe get rid of some of the corruption that had existed in Congress, especially, in the early part of the 20th century. But these people are elected by getting, money from campaign donors. So getting them to vote to limit the ways they can get money from campaign donors is kind of a difficult thing to do. Ultimately, what you end up with is with a few different laws. And I really think that there are probably three basic things that you need to keep in mind to sort of just have these with you. The first one is the establishment of political action committees, or PACs. Okay, these are set up so that an interest group that wants to donate to candidates has to establish a political action committee, and then they have to report the amount of money that they've given to candidates. They have to report all the money that comes in, and this is a way of trying to keep track of the whole process. Now, when Congress passed the McCain-Feingold Act in I think it was 2002. They went through and they tried to sort of rein this in because there had been a couple of challenges to things that were in campaign finance law. And this gave the rise, when they wrote it, they had a section in there called 527, and it created these groups, or it allowed these groups to create themselves, I think is a better way to put it, that aren't allowed to campaign directly or donate directly to a candidate, but they are allowed to have issue ads. Okay, so they really had to go through when they're clarifying this and put down, like, there's certain words that would indicate that you're endorsing a candidate, vote for and stuff like that. But if you avoid those words, the 527 kind of left you wide open, and you could do whatever you wanted to, as long as you weren't really endorsing a candidate. The classic example of the 527s was the election of 2004, when George W. Bush was running for re-election against John Kerry. And John Kerry was like totally just hammered by these 527 groups, especially one calling themselves the Swift Boat Veterans for America, I think it was. And what they did is they created a series of ads which attacked John Kerry. And with the 527s, they're allowed to spend as much money as, there's no limit on how much they can spend on these. Now, the real effect of this was that by attacking the opponent of George W. Bush, they were, in essence, doing as much as supporting George W. Bush. And then I would also know the the Citizens United case, which opened up the freedom to donate to political action committees even more as an expression, sort of an extension of the freedom of expression. And it created these super PACs. And super PACs have the ability to, they don't have to disclose their donors, so people can donate anonymously. There's no limit on what they're able to bring in or spend. And again, as long as they avoid certain key phrases, they can be a part of the election process. And a lot of money flowed in the last 2 presidential elections from these groups, these super PACs. Is that pretty much a nice little overview there, Tom?
Yeah, I think so. And especially like that Citizens United case and McCain-Feingold, I think that's very important. And remember that Citizens United, the Supreme Court said that basically there is, this is a violation if you say that interest groups and parties cannot speak freely, then that is a violation of their First Amendment rights. Now, Citizens United kept contribution limits on campaigns. So if I'm contributing to someone's campaign, then the Supreme Court didn't mess with that. But an independent organization cannot be told you can only spend a certain amount of money, because that, according to the court, was a violation of the First Amendment. And so super PACs are a creature of the Citizens United case. And, as far as that goes, remember that super PACs cannot coordinate. Okay, they can't coordinate with a campaign, so there can't be any email, phone call, text message, any kind of record of communication, whereas a regular political action committee can coordinate and that sort of thing. Okay, so that is possible with a regular political action committee. So I just tweeted an Android promo code for Romulus government. I'll show y'all, what the app does in just a little bit. There, let's see. So there is one going on right now. Let's see. So, okay, so we've got that going on, and that should be available to everyone. Somebody just asked what was okay. And the thing is, it looks like we've got more people watching than were watching earlier. So, keep telling your friends that this is going on. Let me see if I can find another good question here. All right. Now, divided party control, okay, can it make the process difficult? Okay, thank you, Ryan, one of my Twitter followers here. As far as that goes, what they call gridlock informally, but the exam likes to call divided government, okay? So what happens here is, if you look at the last 6 years of President Obama's term, that what you saw in the last 6 years of President Obama's term was that the Republicans controlled at least one house of Congress. And so when you look at the first part of his term, you had the health care reform, the, $787 stimulus package, and all of that kind of stuff that passed. Now, after that, there really weren't a lot of, after the Republicans took over one house, there really weren't a great many legislative achievements for President Obama. Now, of course, President Trump right now, the Republicans control the Senate, the House, and the White House, and I guess technically even the Supreme Court. But, President Trump is having a hard time getting his agenda through, because the other thing is that party discipline only goes so far, that you've got, the Republicans, typically the party in the majority has to deal with like a moderate faction, because you have these districts that are kind of swing districts. And so some of these people may be Republicans, but they still have to think about getting reelected. And remember, that's what politicians want to do more than anything else, is they want to be reelected. As far as due process, this is making sure, this is a legal term, that you're making sure that, basically from the time that I am investigated, searched, arrested, going through all the way to my trial, that I receive all of the, basically all the I's are dotted and the T's crossed. So if you think about, for example, Miranda versus Arizona, where basically this guy Miranda was brought into interrogation, and he said, I killed the guy. He confessed to killing the guy. All right. And so as far as that, although he confessed to killing the guy, the Supreme Court ruled, and this was, I think, a 5-4 ruling, a hotly contested ruling, because the Supreme Court said, you know what? He wasn't informed of his rights. He didn't realized that he had the right to remain silent. And so, basically the Supreme Court said, you're going to have to let this murderer go. And so it's one of those things that, it's like somebody is back on the streets that killed a guy because due process wasn't followed. So that's basically, where they read their rights, where they provided with an attorney, was the jury impartial, all of these things, was the evidence. You think about the exclusionary rule, Matt versus Ohio, that when you look at that, as far as, was that followed? Was there any illegally obtained evidence that was used? So due process, and also things like habeas corpus, that I cannot be detained without being charged with a crime, over a certain amount of time. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about due process, was all of that kind of stuff, Okay, so let's see what's going on here. All right. Mr. Seltzer, not at all. Go ahead and field some questions. Okay. Whatever. Yeah, we're glad that you support us and all of that kind of stuff. And especially if you're replying to people on Twitter, we're here to help. Okay. Matt asked, what are the key differences between the Senate and the House? Now, let me go ahead, Matt, and just make a little note here. Okay. As far as that goes, there was, let me go ahead and take a look here. I'm going to show you my YouTube channel, Paul's YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, you can go to my channel, of course, Tom Ritchie. If you're not subscribed to that channel, probably should be. Now, if you go to the Senate versus the House. Okay, so the Senate versus the House. My video is going to be, the second one there. Pick which one you want to watch. I do it a little faster than Crash Course. And I'm actually a school teacher, so that's also another added bonus. But I basically go into a very detailed, comparison, contrast of the Senate and the House. Now, Paul Sargent. Okay, so when you go to Paul Sargent's channel, which he's got a series of videos on AP government. Okay, so when you go into his channel, we can see here, and he's got an AP government cram session later on tonight. Basically, what I'm going to be doing, ladies and gentlemen, is I'm going to be calling it a night at some point, and I'm going to dismiss you to Paul's channel. Now, AP government, bit by bit. You can click on here, and Paul's got a lot of different things here. As far as what is democracy, do parliamentary systems work, the role of political parties, campaign finance. Okay, and then so subscribe to Paul's channel. Now, as far as what I've got, it's not a whole lot of AP government videos, but I've got one here on the presidency, where I go into the powers of the president, linkage institutions. All right. So I've got one on that, party identification, and the Senate and the House. Those are the main things that I've got so far for AP government. So just to kind of make that, clear, that we've already got some things there to help you. So I want to make sure that you understand that there are some resources on YouTube that Paul and I have put on that. Okay, so, foreign policy. Okay, so as far as that goes, Mighty Mito for president. All right, good luck with that. Now, Paul, when it comes to foreign policy, what's the role of the president and what's the role of Congress, and how does each branch have power when it comes to foreign policy?
Well, this is one thing that is sort of a very broad topic. And what you'll see, this tends to show up more on FRQs than in the multiple choice section of the exam. And foreign policy is really broad. Now, most students' minds, in my experience, tend to go directly to war. So let's just start there. Why not? So in terms of war, the push and pull in the checks and balances has to do with how war is carried out. On the one hand, the president has the power of as commander-in-chief to be able to direct the armed forces and to send them into combat. But then on the other hand, Congress is given the power to declare war. Now, declaring war was something that is a very, very sort of 18th century way of doing things, and 19th century way of doing things, and all right, fine, even into the 20th century a little bit. But after World War II, I mean, we kind of gave up on the whole idea of declaring war and have sort of fought undeclared wars since then, which is kind of taken away from Congress's power. But Congress And this is one thing that I really stress with my students, is that when you see a question that asks about Congress's power, whether it's foreign policy or anything, think about the things Congress can do and then apply them to the situation. And one of the most important powers Congress has is the power of the purse. They have the ability to fund or not fund any sort of foreign war. Now, obviously, congressmen are going to have a real political problem if they decide not to send, uniforms and food to troops that are stationed overseas fighting a war. There's a political issue there. But they do have the ability to refuse to fund these things. But foreign policy also goes bigger than that. It has to do with trade negotiations. It has to do with things like NAFTA. It has to do with diplomatic recognition of different countries. It has to do with sending ambassadors to different countries. And so foreign policy as a thing is incredibly multifaceted. When the rule of thumb I always give my students is, when you see something that's broad like that, just try and think foreign policy being any relations with a foreign government, and then how could Congress and the president carry this out? Maybe the president has executive agreements. Maybe they issue executive orders that have to do with the way we, have relations with other countries. Maybe he orders the representative to the UN to make a speech. And on the other hand, Congress can fund or defund things. Congress can pass laws that create programs to help out other countries, or cut back on programs that help out other countries. And so, foreign policy, like I said, big, broad thing that is sort of a constant struggle sometimes between the two branches of government.
All right, let's see what else we've got there. And Nicholas, we are working on getting you the promo code. Sorry, the Android promo code, which it looks like Nicholas got a hold of this, was actually a Euro code, but we are going to fix that, get some more codes out there. All right, so as far as that goes, fiscal federalism and federalism. Paul, do you have anything on that as far as the different types of federalism?
I think, okay, so federalism, I was watching the replay of last night's session, and I like what Keith Hughes has said, which is like, if you're still asking what federalism is at this point in the year, then maybe tomorrow you need to be sick or something. But it's one of those words that's kind of tough to.
He's specifically asking about like fiscal federalism, like the nuanced federalism. I get the feeling he knows what federalism is. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
Oh, that's okay. All right. So in fiscal federalism, this is a way where, instead of taking away powers from the states, the federal government is going to try and coerce the states into doing things. And let's face it, the federal government has a lot of money. And so that they can use in order to get the states to do things that they may want them to do, whether it's through, say, integrating hiring practices, whether it's through following certain codes when they build bridges or something, or whether it's getting the states to raise their drinking ages to 21. All of these are situations where the federal government will offer up money, and then the states can choose to take the money or not to take the money. But by taking the money, they have to comply with some sort of federal regulations. And generally speaking, the federal government is going to give this out in two types of grants. They're either going to have what are called categorical grants, which are going to be specifically like the money is tied to some sort of category of spending, roads, infrastructure improvements, something like that, school lunch programs maybe. And then the other kind of grants are called block grants. And in these, the states have a whole lot more discretion in how to spend the federal government's money. But in both of these cases, the federal government is exerting some authority over the states, And thus, and this is where it becomes a federalism issue, the federal government is in essence taking away, or at least co-opting in some way, powers that are traditionally state powers and maybe governing them in a certain way. We can look at this as a very nasty sort of controlling big brother kind of thing, or we can look at it as simply trying to create policies which are going to be more equitable throughout the country. You know, if you subsidize education, then it's going to make states that have low education budgets more, more able to do their jobs, and maybe you even out education a little bit across the country. And so fiscal federalism is sort of a form of this federalism relationship between the states and the federal government. That get the gist there? Tom, I lost you somehow. I'm not sure if I'm on or not.
All right, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Okay, so I think we're on. The broadcast went off for a little bit. Let me make sure that we're back up. Okay, so the playback was interrupted. Okay, so I think, okay, it looks like we are back. Okay, so Paul, you were talking about, what was it?
Fiscal federalism. I don't know where it cut out.
Yeah. I think you were talking about like you were starting to talk about the different types of grants, and then it cut out for a little bit.
Gotcha.
I think the problem there was on my end.
Okay, so the grant system is where the federal government is going to give money to states in order to help them to do things they'd like to do. And really, you can think there are two kinds of grants. There are categorical grants, and these things are not named in any real difficult way. Categorical grants are tied to a category of spending. Your category might be infrastructure, your category might be education, your category might be your welfare system, and the money that the federal government gives allows the states to do what they need to do, with a little more. But these federal grants come with strings attached. In order to get the money, states have to agree to do things in certain ways. People who are, for example, if it's a road grant, the states may have to agree that hiring on the worker crews that work on the roads has to be they can't discriminate against people based on race or gender or any sort of protected categories. The other kind of grants which are given to states are called block grants, and I just picture this big block of cash, like a crate of cash that's being given to states. And basically the states are being told, you can spend the money however it is that you'd like. And so with these, it's the federal government exerting some control over the states, but also helping the states do things which they might not have money otherwise to do. All right, now Tom, you froze on my screen, so I don't know if we're live again or if we glitched. I wonder. I'm going to check it out here. I don't know, I might be...
Okay, sorry, Paul, my internet, something seems to be going on with my internet tonight. If this goes again, now at some point we're going to kind of move this over to Paul's channel, and we might do that sooner rather than later if we have to. Let's see. So Paul, you're here and I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I think that we're good. All right, so let me just go ahead and continue this and keep it going. All right, so let's see what we have coming up on Twitter. Okay, we are back. Okay, again, sorry about that. Hopefully that's the last interruption that we have here. All right. So thank you, Mr. Patton, for your support for the app and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's see the different type of House committees. Okay, the different type of House committees. That is Sebastian, and also Mighty Mito again is asking about the War Powers Act. Now, the thing is that the War Powers Act is a post-Vietnam act. Okay, so basically at the beginning of the Vietnam War, the Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which basically told President Johnson, do whatever you want. Okay, like whatever needs to be done in Vietnam after the USS Maddox was allegedly attacked. Do whatever you need to do. But when the president did whatever he needed to do, you have to be careful because that's not what the framers intended. The framers didn't intend like for Congress to just be like, executive, do what you need to do. And we ended up with 500,000 men in this remote Southeast Asian country and 60,000 dead Americans, and really the sort of thing is that the president did more than what Congress had in mind. So what Congress did with the War Powers Resolution, they tried to basically limit the power of the president to commit troops, but at the same time, they give him a lot of leeway because basically the president can commit troops anywhere in the world, but he has to notify Congress within 48 hours. Okay, so within 2 days. And then Congress doesn't have to authorize the president's use of the military until 60 days. So really, President Trump can do anything with the U.S. military that he wants as long as it doesn't take more than 60 days. And, you compare that to how President Trump has had a hard time getting legislation passed, has had a hard time with these travel ban executive orders. But when he wants to drop a bomb on Syria, he can just do it. So that is one thing to remember, that the president's power when it comes to foreign policy is typically greater than in domestic policy. Okay, so the president has a lot more influence over foreign policy than domestic policy. Now, Sebastian wants to know, what about like congressional committees, standing committees, joint committees, all of those kinds of different committees that exist in Congress, which of course Congress and the presidency is really like that's one of the big sections on the exam. So that's very important to understand the committee system in Congress.
All right, so congressional committees are really kind of a way of just dividing up the work. Congress has a whole lot of work they have to do. There's a whole lot of problems facing the nation, and they have to find some way. They had to find some way a long time ago to to sort of get it all done. And so what they did is they divided Congress into these little pieces called committees, and each committee focuses on different areas of policy. Now, the most common ones are called standing committees. And standing committees is not because they don't have chairs in the room. It's because they're like always there. Okay, they're not going away. They're not just temporary. They're going to be sort of permanently standing. In fact, generally the AP exam will call them permanent subject matter committees. And so you have like a committee for agriculture, you have a committee for foreign relations, you have a committee for judicial, like for the judiciary, all kinds of different committees. These committees are part of how not only does it help divide up the work, but it also allows congressmen and congresswomen to get a little more subject expertise. They can find themselves on committees which they're interested in. They might be big into foreign policy, but it also might be something that's really important to their district. If you're a representative from central Nebraska, the agriculture committee is probably a good place to go. You want to be on there and help with like farm policy and stuff like that. So those are standing committees. Then there are the other three committees, which are sort of less, they're less common. A joint committee is something which is created and it has members of both houses of Congress. Basically, I mean, the committees, the standing committees, there are standing committees in the House, there are standing committees in the Senate. These are committees which are brought together for both House and Senate members to work together to try and find bills which they can agree on. Then you have select committees, which are very, very temporary. They're put together for a very specific reason. and they might do some investigating or something. That's typically what it tends to be, is a problem arises they need to look into. And so the select committee will be for a very specific purpose for a very short period of time, may or may not, although I think it typically does contain members from both houses of Congress. And then finally, you have the conference committee. And the conference committees are brought together whenever a bill passes through both houses of Congress, really, because the Constitution states that a bill has to pass through both houses of Congress in exactly the same form, like word for word, punctuation for punctuation. It has to be identical, and it just never happens, because in both of these houses of Congress, like they're making little changes, they're adding things on, they're editing words and all of this. So when a bill gets through the two houses of Congress, it's not exactly the same thing. A conference committee will then come together and they'll iron out the differences. So they have one bill that they can both agree on, that then, and this is where, you know, when I draw this up on the board, my students kind of groan like, oh my gosh, we're going back and doing this again. It has to go back to both houses of Congress to get voted on before it gets, and has to pass through before it gets to the president. So if you understand the four basic types of committees: standing, joint, select, and conference, and you kind of know what they do, then you pretty much understand committees.
Okay, so all right, so as far as that, let's see what else we've got going on here. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's see. Mr. Seltzer, if you could like take me out of your reply, like when you're replying, if there's any way to take me out of there, it's kind of crowding my feed. I'm trying to get to all these questions. All right, so but yeah, Mr. Seltzer is answering some of these easy answer questions on Twitter. All right, excellent. Okay, so the budgeting process. We've got a budgeting process question. So again, the president and Congress, Paul, as far as what are the powers of the president and Congress when it comes to budgeting, and how do they work together to create that process?
Well, the budget is something that is extremely complicated. It's extremely difficult. It's extremely troubling when you really get into it, to be honest with you. You know, whenever I think budget, I think back to Otto von Bismarck saying that, you know, there's two things you don't want to see made: laws and sausages. But I mean, the budgets are a great example of this, because budgets are going to have all kinds of different spending, especially when we're talking about a federal budget, which is maybe around $4 trillion. It's easy to hide money in there. But that aside, the basic process that happens is that typically the president and especially the Office of Management and Budget will come up with a budget proposal that they'll then send to Congress. Now, Congress is going to start messing with it, obviously. They're going to make changes. They're going to amend it. They're going to add in spending, especially for people who might be on the fence on voting for it. And then they're going to change it. They then pass through a budget bill. And then that budget, it has to, and then of course, just like any other bill, the president has to sign it in order for it to go into law. So that's the basic budget process. Now, obviously, what we find ourselves doing over and over is we keep passing deficit budgets in which the federal government spends more money than it brings in, which leads to an entire discussion of federal debt and sort of where extra money comes from, and maybe how to solve the problem of the federal debt. And those are ongoing conversations that no one seems to either be able to figure out, or to really have the political will to take some pretty darn troubling moves in order to figure out. So it was a question about sort of that budgetary process that I.
Yeah, and basically, yeah, I think you got that, how the legislative and the executive work together on those things. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's see, cooperative and dual federalism. That's a question from Olivia. Cooperative and dual federalism.
You want me to take that one?
Yeah. Go right ahead. Yeah,
Oh,
go right ahead.
all right. So cooperative and dual federalism, you may have, there's a lot of teachers out there who bake cakes. Now, I'm not a baker, so I don't do this. I draw a really, really bad picture of cakes up on the board and pretend like I've created cakes, and my students kind of don't like that. But this is a way of describing the ways that the federal government and the states interact. In a system of dual federalism, which really existed, think from the beginning of the, like from the writing of the Constitution, all the way up until, let's just say, the beginning of the Great Depression. This is often described as a layer cake. In other words, at the top, you've got the federal government. At the bottom, you've got the state government. They do their own things. They have their own powers. And there's this layer of icing, which, while it tastes really good, prevents the two sides of the cake from interacting with one another. The federal government doesn't mess with state powers, the states don't mess with federal government powers, and everyone's like real happy. But the problem is at the bottom of the cake doesn't always work out. Some parts of the cake have more money than other parts of the cake and all of that. And the federal government has, which is at the top of the cake, has things that they want the states to do. So starting around the Great Depression, and especially with the New Deal, we see a model of cooperative federalism. And this is where the federal government and the state governments will work together in order to solve some of the problems. It usually, and this gets to the fiscal federalism things we discussed earlier, it usually involves the federal government giving more money to the states in order to help them do what they need to do. But it can be the federal government stepping in when things get a little bit difficult. An example of this would be when Hurricane Katrina hit the coast of Louisiana in 2005. Here comes this devastating Category 5 hurricane, like demolishes New Orleans. I mean, it was really, really horrible. And I mean, the state of Louisiana, let alone the city of New Orleans, they didn't have the money, the resources, the manpower, the anything in order to deal with this crisis. And so what they did is they asked the federal government for help here. And so the federal government then stepped in with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they started to provide relief and cleanup and all kinds of help to the government of Louisiana in order to help with this storm. The storm cleanup and all of that's a state power, but now the federal government is kind of helping out. So cooperative federalism is often defined as marble cake federalism, where there's no clear division of powers, and the federal government and the state governments are kind of intertwined. I don't know if this gives you the idea of a marble cake, but there it is. That's about as well as I do. And I really, shout out to all the teachers who bake marble cakes and bring them in for all their students and give them cake. I wish I was like you, but no, I just kind of do this a lot and then hope the kids get the idea. So, yeah.
All right. So, Paul, let's see what else we've got. All right. Let's see. Bay there. Okay. A federal mandate. Okay. A federal mandate, which the thing is, a federal mandate is when the federal government basically passes legislation that says that the states are going to do this. Okay. This is a federal mandate. Now, there are some federal mandates when we're talking about fiscal federalism. There are some things that constitutionally the federal government cannot make states do. And so it puts things in there like if your drinking age isn't 21, then you won't get X federal highway funds. Or, it's like No Child Left Behind and these other laws. The federal government can't make the states abide by them, but they can attach money to them. Now, there are some things that are just downright federal mandates. Now, one of the things that comes up often, and I've seen this actually referenced before on the AP government exam, is the motor voter law in the 1990s. And so what happened was that Congress, which had Democrats, Democratic majority in the first 2 years of Clinton's term, passed this motor voter law, which said that states have to have voter registration in the DMV. okay, that in the DMV, states must allow people to register to vote when they get a driver's license. Now, this was to make it easier to register. Now, historically, if turnout is low, that benefits Republicans. If turnout is high, that benefits Democrats. And so, it's like Republican voters vote no matter what. When I was growing up, my dad would say before Election Day, pray for rain, because, he's a Republican, and that would keep the Democrats from voting. And so when it comes down to it, what you get into with that is that South Carolina, a Republican state, my state, sued the federal government because basically the federal government said that you must have this system in place, but they didn't attach any funds to it. And this is what's called an unfunded mandate. Okay, so an unfunded mandate is when the federal government says that you're going to do this, and you don't have any money attached to it. So South Carolina sued the federal government and lost. Okay, which of course, remember with the court system, now the federal court system and the state court systems, they both go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so really, when a state sues the federal government, now sometimes the state wins, such as the Lopez case, where a young man had a firearm at a school and was arrested for a federal crime. And the Rehnquist court, now, of course, the Rehnquist court is known for new federalism, okay? New federalism, meaning that the Rehnquist court was going along, like basically had a tendency to give things back to the states. And so what happened there was, with, somebody having a firearm at school. The Supreme Court said in the Lopez case that, you can't arrest him for a federal crime, like that it's too invasive, and the federal government can't use the loose commerce clause. They can't use that to say, oh, well, guns are commerce, those go across state lines, and so therefore, that's stretching out the Constitution just a bit too much. And so Lopez was then charged with a state crime. What he did was also illegal in the state. So as far as that goes, you've got, mandates are kind of a form of federalism. And in some cases, states are able to win on those things. But, a lot of the times it's like, when you go to the Supreme Court, you're going before a federal tribunal. So as far as that, mandates. Now, Paul, is there any other mandate that you can think about that a student be likely to encounter on the exam?
You know what? Anytime when two guys are out to dinner, I consider a mandate myself, but, not for the exam, probably. I think the one that always comes to mind is the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. We all are in public buildings, and under the Americans with Disabilities Act, public buildings had to be accessible to Americans with disabilities. So it was a well-named act. This includes, larger bathroom stalls. It includes wider doors that wheelchairs can get through. It includes ramps where you might have stairs. It includes elevators where you have a multi-story building. It includes, the list goes on and on. Fire alarms that flash so that people who are hard of hearing can see that there's danger. All of these things were put forth, and the federal government basically said, every public building has to include these things. Now, these aren't cheap, especially with all of the public buildings which existed at the time when the law was passed, because they all had to be retrofitted. Like every doorway had to be, they had to go back, they had to bust it out and widen it. They had to put in all these different facilities in order to comply with the law the federal government had passed. But the federal government didn't give any money to the states in order to do all of this construction work. So the states had to go through and really ante up the money for all of this on their own. While everybody, well, not everybody, obviously people disagree, but while most people, I would say, thought that this was generally going to be a positive move, it was an enormous expense, especially at first.
All right. Okay, tweeting out some more promo codes right now for Romulus government. Of course, remember, it's only $2.99. So as far as that goes, let's see. Nicole, let's see what we've got here. Let's see, non-follower. Okay, let's see if we got somebody who's following here. The difference, okay, between the court cases that include Georgia. If you're going to ask about a court case, we can do a few court case questions, but let's focus on court cases that, like, ask us about a specific court case or a specific doctrine or something like that. All right. Okay, excuse me. Let's see, as far as that goes, let's see, as far as exclusionary rule. Okay, the exclusionary rule, Aaron, is basically it applies to illegally obtained evidence. All right, so the exclusionary rule, now the court case, what this is about and what you want to do here is you want to make sure that you've got the with the court case, you want to match it up with something. So when you're talking about the exclusionary rule, Map versus Ohio. And so as far as that goes, you're dealing with illegal searches and seizures. And so the exclusionary rule says that if evidence was illegally obtained, then it cannot be used in court. And so, basically in order to obtain evidence legally, you've got to have a warrant. Also, that warrant needs to be very specific about what you're looking for, okay? So if you come into my house and, you're coming in, you're searching, and you're searching for, let's say I've got like automatic weapons, and that's what you think that I'm an arms smuggler. And then you come in and it's like, you find that I'm, growing marijuana in my basement. I'm not, okay? Like, basically like there's my basement, that's not happening. But, if you were like, oh, we found a bunch of marijuana in the basement. Well, the thing is, that's not what you had the warrant for. You had the warrant to go in there and look for illegally, you were looking for automatic weapons. And so that marijuana would not be able to be used against me in court unless they can show how they would have obtained it anyway, or they had another source of that information. But if they had no idea about that and they came in my house and they found it, now it'd be one thing if it was like on the coffee table or something like that. But as far as that goes, you can only use what you are searching for. You have to know what it is you're searching for, and going from there. So that is basically the basis of the exclusionary rule. Paul, have I covered that all right?
Yeah, I think so. That's a pretty good explanation.
Okay, good deal, good deal. So let's see now. Buckley versus Vallejo. And that's actually one of those that let's see. Paul, have you got that one on your quick look up?
Well, Buckley v. Vallejo was the court case which had to do with one man, one vote, and basically what it was, it's an attack on the gerrymandering procedure where you'd have these districts which are drawn, which had a significantly larger, like
Actually, Paul, this one, I think you're thinking about another one. Now, one thing we got to remind you about is we don't have to take this test tomorrow. Y'all do. Sometimes when it comes to these court cases, like, it's just like, you're like, wait, which one was that? So, my Romulus app, actually, the Romulus government app has a whole section on court cases. Okay. So when you look that up why is this, okay. So as far as that goes,
I was talking Baker Carr, wasn't I?
What's that?
That I was talking Baker v.
I think so. Now, Buckley versus Vallejo is a campaign finance case. But see, the thing is even we get confused on this stuff. Now, one thing, let me go ahead and, and just kind of talk about court cases real quick, because not all court cases are created equal. Okay, that's important to note, that different court cases, now there are what I call tier 1 court cases. Okay, so these are court cases that are very, very likely to show up. Now, of course, that's going to include the 3 Marshall court cases. Okay, the 3 Marshall court cases that are most famous: Marbury v. Madison, Then you've got, Gibbons versus Ogden and McCulloch v. Maryland. Now, all of those, what you want to do is kind of group those into a box together, okay? And those are Marshall Court cases. So John Marshall is a Federalist. He supported a strong central government. He supported, tended to support a loose construction of the Constitution. So therefore, in McCulloch versus Maryland, the bank is legal, okay, because there's the supremacy clause. Now, some people misunderstand the supremacy clause. The supremacy clause says that laws that the federal government passes, this Constitution and laws that are passed by the federal government in pursuance thereof are the supreme law of the land. So federal law will trump state law as long as the federal law is constitutional. Now, if the federal government starts doing something that is, contrary to the Constitution or beyond its powers, then that's not going to fly. But with John Marshall being a loose constructionist, a believer in the doctrine of implied powers, he said the bank is a legitimate power of the federal government, and therefore the state of Maryland could not tax it. So basically, against states, for the national government, and also for business enterprise. In Gibbons versus Ogden, basically what happened is New York State tried to stop the steamship line from coming in, the steamboat line, and Cornelius Vanderbilt was operating the steamboat, and basically what John Marshall said is that's interstate commerce, because they are starting in New Jersey, they're going into New York. And so basically, I think it was a pretty cut and dry decision, but it is clear here that Marshall again is when a state is deciding to flex its muscle, John Marshall would typically say no, that's not going to happen. And so just several of these things. Now, Buckley versus Vallejo is a campaign finance case. Okay, so a majority of judges held that limits on election spending in the Federal Campaign Act of 1971 are unconstitutional. So as far as that kind of stuff, a restriction on spending. So when it comes down to it, you've got several different different cases, which you could put Buckley versus Vallejo, you could put that in, kind of pair that up with the Citizens United case. So these are cases having to do with campaign finance. So one of the best things to do about that. Now, as far as that goes, let's see, non-follower there. Let's see. Let's see. Aaron is asking if we've got, Roe v. Wade, as far as, Paul, if you could go into the basis of the ruling and also the antecedents of that ruling, as far as, Griswold and all of that kind of stuff, I think that would be helpful for the kids.
Yeah, Roe v. Wade is one where I get the feeling that the writers of the exam take it for granted that most everyone taking the exam will know the very basics, at least, of Roe v. Wade. In the Roe v. Wade decision, what the court decided, it was a case about abortion, and it decided that states can't limit access to abortions in the first trimester of a pregnancy. The woman, and this was the basis of the ruling, had a right to privacy over her own body during that time. But where the College Board will try and get you is that they're going to assume that that Roe v. Wade is a fairly well-known case, and so they will, as Tom kind of alluded to, they'll group it with Griswold very often. And Griswold v. Connecticut was a court case in which the state of Connecticut had outlawed basically the giving of information, or the dissemination of information, if you'll excuse the pun, about birth control. And so you like that. So what they did is I'm looking at Tom laughing, and now I'm laughing. Okay. So the idea was the court found that to be unconstitutional based on the fact of what they called penumbras that were included in the Bill of Rights. In other words, Bill of Rights doesn't come out and directly say that that we have a right to privacy, but it's hinted at in things. Illegal search and seizure, for example, is a hint that we have the right to privacy of our own belongings. And so it was a privacy case. Now, what they'll do on this AP exam, and like I've seen this over and over and over again, so like look for this one tomorrow, is that they'll group Griswold and Roe v. Wade together and ask what issue the court was ruling on in these two things. And yes, the ever tempting abortion answer will be there waiting for you, trying to get you to take the bait. But privacy will be there as well, and that's the one that you want to choose. I don't think I've ever seen a situation on this test where they simply want you to know that Roe v. Wade was about abortion, because I think that's considered a level of information that people would come into the course with already. Is that a fair assessment there?
Yeah, I think so, Paul. I think the main thing is understanding that causal link between the right to privacy established in Griswold and then then Roe v. Wade. I think that is definitely fair to say that is being seen as a privacy issue. That's what I've seen as far as looking over stuff. So I think that's fine. All right. And so, Paul, let's go into maybe like the clauses of the 14th Amendment and maybe just a little kind of review of the concept of selective incorporation. Because I think we got some people that weren't here last night. But, I'm getting some questions on the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment is typically one of those things that it's going to be on the test in some way, shape, or form, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, most constitutional scholars will say that this is the most important of the amendments, because when the 14th Amendment was passed, it was created in response to Southern states' denial of rights of citizenship to former slaves. But the wording of the 14th Amendment was very, very, very broad. It established that anyone that's born inside the United States is a citizen of the United States and of the state that they live in. And it went on to say that no state can deny its citizens of due process of law, and it also guaranteed equal protection under the law. Now, those two clauses have been used to create two concepts which oftentimes get confused. The due process clause has created our modern concept of civil liberties, these protections that we have against excessive government intrusion in our lives. Sorry, I'm having a problem talking here. And basically what these are places in which the federal government might try and take away, in the words of John Locke, our life, liberty, or property, without going through any sort of process. And the 14th Amendment guarantees that states have to follow that due process. And so things like the exclusionary rule that we talked about, freedom of speech has to be guaranteed by the state governments. Cruel and unusual punishment can't be used by state governments. All of these sorts of things have been incorporated. And I don't know whether I want to go into a corporation or I'll go in corporation. Why not? So what the Supreme Court decided to do, starting in the early part of the 20th century, was to not just sort of like blanketly state, I don't know that blanketly is a word, but we'll go with it, that they didn't want to make some blanket statement that like the entire Bill of Rights now applies to the states. Thank you, 14th Amendment. They went case by case by case by case, and largely because courts don't have the power to just kind of like say the entire Bill of Rights applies. So case by case, they had to bring in parts of the 14th Amendment and say, yes, states cannot do this. And then it becomes part of this incorporated set of civil liberties. The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment then gives our civil rights, which deal with equality based on different classes of people, race, gender, religion, those sorts of things. And they guarantee that people in the United States are given equal protection under the law. That laws can't be created that provide inequalities between these different protected groups. And so this 14th Amendment has kind of blossomed from this idea of we need to ensure that states are giving former slaves the rights that they really deserve as citizens, into a whole set of civil rights and civil liberties that we all enjoy today. Now, it's important to note that not the entire Bill of Rights has been incorporated up to this point, and very notably the Third Amendment, which prohibits the quartering of slaves in people's homes. The quartering of troops in people's homes has not been incorporated, largely because no state has, as to my knowledge, ever tried to quarter troops in people's homes. So there's never been a court case, which means it's never been incorporated, which means it's kind of still sitting out there. It's a real danger, Tom. I tell my students that when they're answering the FRQs, answer what's asked and don't go off about other stuff. And sometimes I feel like when we do these, we go against our own FRQ advice and drift off into other places. So did I answer the question?
Yes. Okay, so as far as that goes, okay, tweeted a few more codes. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, we got 420 viewers. All right, so thank y'all for telling your friends about this Hangout. We started off, I think, with around 200 or 150 or something like that. Now, Paul, we were planning on directing this to your channel at some point. We can do that, but a lot of times when we do something like that, you switch channels, you lose people. I mean, it's really up to you if you want to maybe hang around here a little longer before we do that, or how do we want to set that up? It's like 9:17 right now, so you want to go ahead and maybe send them your way about 9:30.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be calling it a night sometime soon. I've got a big A-Push hangout with Hip Hughes tomorrow night, the last review. Okay, so remember, tomorrow is National Star Wars Day. Okay, so if you've got friends in A-Push, tell them about the last review, which is going to be tomorrow. It's going to be just all got a whole Star Wars thing going, and I think it's going to be awesome. Some of y'all that were watching last night saw me put on the Kylo Ren mask when I was talking about dark money. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a few more questions. Now, if you're not subscribed to Paul Sargent, you should be. He's on YouTube. Okay, so make sure that now, Paul, tell them how to get to your channel. When we're going to take a few more questions here, but let's make sure they know how to get to your channel.
Okay, yeah, probably the easiest way to get to my channel is just to go to YouTube and search Paul Sargent. It's Sargent, and mine will be the first one that shows up. I've got lots of videos there that have to do with AP government. If you're also taking or will be taking AP European history, I have a number of videos on that as well. Yeah, it's a small channel. It's not quite the Tom Ritchie, Keith Hughes, Hip Hughes kind of channel, but it's my own little tiny little corner of the internet, I guess.
Well, and Paul, always a pleasure to have you on here with us. I've been, just a pleasure to be able to work with Hip Hughes, Paul, all these great people that are teachers that are making videos. Paul, I got a few of these yesterday, and I've gotten a few more tonight. Looks like Omar wants to know about the bureaucracy. What is the most important thing that we can tell Omar about the federal bureaucracy that they're likely to encounter on the exam?
I think really when we look at the federal bureaucracy, you guys just need to understand kind of what it is. You need to conceptualize this. And the way I explain it is the federal bureaucracy is really everyone who works for the federal government that isn't an elected official. So, I mean, senators, Congress, representatives, the president, the judges, they're not part of the bureaucracy. But literally, I'm going to go ahead and just say anyone else that gets a federal paycheck for doing a federal job is part of the bureaucracy. This includes everything from auditors and CPAs at the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, to undercover agents at the CIA, the janitor at Yosemite National Park's visitor center. I mean, they're all part of this massive federal bureaucracy. And really, when the bureaucracy comes up, a lot of the questions that tend to arise around the bureaucracy tend to be questions about how it works within the government, like its place. And so the simplest way to explain this is to say that the bureaucracy is in charge of implementing the laws. So Congress is going to pass laws, which by necessity, partially because Congress is full of what political scientists call policy generalists. Like, they know a little bit about policy, they have ideas about what they want, but when it comes down to like the nuts and bolts of the actual policy itself, they don't have that kind of technical knowledge. So they're going to pass bills, but they also have to, get a lot of people to agree on them. So they tend to be a little vague for that reason as well. So they pass bills, and then those bills, when they become law, then they have to be executed by the executive branch. Now, if you think of the executive branch as just the president, then you've got it all wrong, because Donald Trump is not out there executing laws. I mean, he can't do it. He's ridiculously busy. And so there's this entire group of people, I mean, millions of people that are out there that are carrying out these laws. These are people who are, again, looking at your taxes. These are people who are running the Smithsonian Museum. These are people who are working in the State Department and trying to come up with, how we should relate with foreign nations. And they really have a lot of what's called discretion in the way that they carry out policy, because they can make a lot of decisions. If we look, for example, at the IRS, the IRS is going to assume that there are people who are going to try and, cheat on their taxes, but they can't go through and check, like, really in depth every single tax return in the United States every year. And so they have the discretion to decide which tax returns and which individuals they're going to look deeply into and audit. The post office has the discretion over, over how often to deliver mail. Around here where we get some snow, for example, there's this little oddity that the postal people don't have to get out of the trucks as they go around the neighborhoods. And so if they can't, like, if you haven't shoveled the snow away from your mailbox far enough that the postal truck can pull up right next to it, then you're just not going to get your mail. And so these are little procedures which are carried out by, or which are decided upon by the bureaucracy in order to carry out the laws that Congress has passed.
All right. So with that, let's see what else we've got here. Okay, let's see. Check for anything we've got here. All right. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, replying to somebody at Tom Ritchie. Now, the thing is, Ashley, I would say, like, the foundation of government, the framers, that's really not going to be a major thing on the exam. Now, one thing I would note, Ashley, is I would say something about originalism. Okay, I've seen this on the exam, that there is, this school of judicial, the school of thought as far as the judiciary, that, as far as originalism. These are judges that, say that basically what should be taken into account is the original intent of the framers of the law. So framers' intent, that has to do with originalism. So when we're judging, we should take into account, what did the people who meant, what did the people who framed this law mean? What was the context? Now, there are other, other schools of thought, like textualism, that you should only look at the text of the law and you should go based on, well, what does this actually mean? in terms of how people would have read this at the time. And then you've got people who have, a little bit more of a, kind of wishy-washy, the whole living constitution thing that, like, things can kind of change with the times. And, if I feel like it should go this way, it should go this way. And of course, that's something when judges are getting confirmed, a lot of these things come up. So I would say that, originalism would be something that you very well could see on the test. All right. So yes, Omar, I said your name, bro. All right. Initiative versus referendum. Okay, so as far as that goes, my man Cedric, I'm not gonna follow somebody without a profile picture, Omar. I'm sorry, I just can't do it. Okay, that's just can't do it. All right, but definitely tell my friend Cedric hello for me. So as far as that initiative and referendum, in case that comes up, Paul, what do we have? What do we have there? Like voting, referendum, and initiative.
Well, this is something that I'm actually pretty close to, because having lived out in California for a very long time, we had the initiative and the petition, and these were attempts that came around in the early part of the 20th century to try and make government more responsive to the concerns of individuals and less responsive to maybe the moneyed interests that sort of dominated, like these big cash, corporations and whatnot. And so they, during the time, California, Wisconsin, Washington, Oregon, these types of places instituted different ways of what's called direct democracy. And so in the initiative process, individual people can actually propose legislation, like laws, and those laws don't have to go through the state legislature. They are if they obtain a certain number of signatures, the law goes onto the ballot, which makes for these ridiculously long ballots when you're voting in California, because there's lots of initiatives that are there. And you don't know a whole lot about all of them, but people not only propose them, but then they sign putting them on the ballot, and then everybody votes on them. And if they get a majority vote, then boom, they become law. And so it's a way of circumventing the state legislature and making laws themselves. Now, they also then passed referendums, and the process of referendum means that there are certain things which the state cannot do without approval by the people. Generally, this has to do with budgetary stuff. The state government can't go deep into debt without or maybe even raise taxes in any significant way without voter approval of doing that, which is oftentimes very difficult. I mean, it's easy to pass a tax increase if the people don't really have a say in whether it happens or not. But if you've got to face the entire state, especially a state the size of California, voting on whether your taxes are going to go up, most people don't want that. So the referendum goes in. And then the third piece that they put in there is called the recall. And the recall is the ability of people, through a process which is a lot like initiative, to pull out elected officials from office, to literally recall them from their elected position. The president of the United States has been elected for 4 years, and unless there's an impeachment with then a conviction in the Senate that would pull him out of office, the people cannot pull Donald Trump out of office. But in a place like California, you can pull the governor out of office by a popular recall vote. And there's a great but way too long story for this broadcast about the recall election that I witnessed when Governor Gray Davis was recalled, and we voted Arnold Schwarzenegger in.
Now, Paul, will you say how you voted in that? I mean, were you like caught up in kind of the fanfare of that? Like, I mean, I wonder what it must have been like to be in California at that time.
It was odd. I mean, I don't want to get too political here, even though this is a political discussion, but I mean, you had a lot of people that were registering to vote, and this was always like the news every night. You'd see this. People would come out and like, why'd you register to vote? They'd be asked, and they say, because I'm voting for the Terminator,
Oh.
and and he even started campaigning with it as a total recall. Was his sort of campaign slogan, because
And we're gonna terminate Gray Davis.
Exactly.
It's like,
Yeah.
I
No one
remember the
watching
rhetoric.
this remembers the original Total Recall. Tom, you realize that, right?
Yeah, I haven't even seen it, so yeah, maybe I should. Now let's get one more question for Paul before we move this to Paul's channel. I'll tweet out one more set of promo codes. A couple promo codes for Romulus government. As far as that goes, test taking tips, Paul. Abby has a question about, let's see. Now, Abby, who's not following, but you know what, Abby, we're going to forgive you. And I think that test taking tips would be great. And then we're going to move this to Paul's channel. Just type in Paul Sargent. He's going to be broadcasting live. Okay. So, Paul, any test taking tips before we sign off?
I've been really focusing on this year. I mean, the number one test taking tip is just relax. I mean, you're going to get all kinds of worked up tomorrow, and you're going to get very anxious, and you just have to be able to tell yourself, you've been at this for a long time. You've been part of this class for months now, whether you're taking it as a full year class or a semester class. I mean, you've spent a lot of time learning about this stuff. And you have to be able to sit back and trust that you know what you're talking about. The reason this is important, I think, is because, especially on the multiple choice, but also on the FRQs, if you're confident that you have some level of competence in this subject, then you're going to be more likely to answer the questions as you know, and you're going to be less likely to second guess yourself or to change your answer because something sounds good, and it snowballs really quickly, and you're going to find yourself, if you're not just relaxed and comfortable, you're going to find yourself doubting yourself left and right, and just feeling kind of stupid about the whole thing. And really, you're not. You're just letting your sort of inner demons work against you. So I tell my students, first of all, to relax. And then the second thing, and this I've been really hammering home this year with my students, you're going to have 100 minutes to answer the FRQs. There's 4 of them, and it's going to seem like a lot, and it is. I mean, it's a lot of writing. You don't have to answer them in order. You don't have to start with number 1 and go all the way through number 4. And so I've sort of coached my students to sit down for 5 minutes with the FRQs. Go through and jot down little reminders to themselves about each part of the FRQs in 5 minutes, very quickly. And then rank those FRQs 1 to 4. With 1 being the FRQ that you know the most about, you're going to have the easiest time answering. And 4 is the one where you're really kind of going to be struggling with it. And then answer the FRQs in that order, because you're going to be fresher while you're writing the one that you're most comfortable with. You're going to be more likely to get every point out of that one. And by the time you get to number 4, you're really going to want to just be done with the whole thing. But it's the question that you know the least about. And if you've made little notes next to it when you first got the FRQs, you've got some little hints sitting out there that can help kind of boost you and push you through with a little momentum through the end of the FRQ section.
All right. And, as far as that, I agree with Paul that really it's just relaxing, trusting yourself. Also, with the FRQs, making sure that you have you answer your best one first and go through there. You got plenty of time to do it. They give you plenty of time for that, probably too much time. Now, the other thing is if there's an A, a B, and a C, answer what you can. Some of the answers, like basically A, B, and C are graded differently. So you can get A right and B right and C wrong. It's okay. Now, the other thing is A might be 2 points. And so you may be able to get part credit for A. Okay, so give it the bet. If you can answer it partially, answer it partially. Now, the most important thing too is if it says explain, then explain. Okay, so don't just like define something, but the best thing to do is make sure that you've got the answer, that there's something specific, and then you explain the significance. So basically, a court case, if you can say Mapp versus Ohio, exclusionary rule. Citizens United, McCain-Feingold, Buckley versus Vallejo, campaign finance, and explain how they did that. Gideon versus Wainwright, right to an attorney. As far as that. So, those are things, make sure, but really, like Paul said, that go ahead and, as far as, what you do, and I mean, just answer the questions. Don't get overly stressed. I just put out 4 free promo codes for Romulus government. Those are going to be the last ones I'm putting out tonight. And we are going to go ahead and sign off from this. But if you especially now, if you're on the East Coast, go to bed. I think Paul and I would agree on that, right?
Yeah, I would.
And the thing is, we're on YouTube. We want you to watch us, but if you're on the East Coast, you really should be winding down by now. Okay. And so, those of you that are, in Mountain Time, Pacific Time, you've still got some time. So Paul's going over to his channel, Paul Sargent, and he's going to be broadcasting. So Paul, any last words real quick before we head out?
No, I'm just posting onto Twitter right now a link to the feed or to the video that I'm going to start up for the review. So for those of you who are still looking for some more hints and whatnot, I'm going to go as long as I can. And I don't have to do an A-Push review tomorrow, so I'm going to go as long as I can, as long as you guys need me, and we'll get as many of your questions answered as possible, and hopefully get you as ready for this exam as we possibly can. So I just sent it out. You can either look on Twitter. It's at psargent, SARGENT. I did the hashtag APGovWin, and I tagged Tom Ritchie in it, so that if you're locked into any of those, you should see it. Or you can simply go to YouTube and search my name, and that'll come up.
Okay, so Paul, I'm going to go ahead and retweet what you just said here. And Paul, it sounds like what you're talking about may be a filibuster. Paul's going to be filibustering tonight, I guess. He's going to be speaking until he cannot speak anymore, or until people are, all in bed or whatever. So thank you very much, Paul Sargent, for joining me tonight. If your friends are in AP Euro, I'm going to be broadcasting all week there. Paul's going to be with me for some of those broadcasts. And then tomorrow, Star Wars Day, ladies and gentlemen, the last review. Okay, so make sure if your friends are in A-Push, tell them about the last review. If you buy the Romulus app and you enjoy it, be sure to tell your friends about that. Great way to review tonight. So as far as that, ladies and gentlemen, may the 4th be with you tomorrow. So make sure that, tomorrow you are one with the Force. The Force is with you, because otherwise, you're going to fail. So thanks again, Paul, for joining us tonight. And thank y'all. Go over to Paul's channel. He's going to be very helpful in answering your questions. And I'll be here for some A-Push folks tomorrow. It's always a pleasure.
Hey, me too. See you later.